What's up, comic book fans, and welcome to Comics Icons. Now, JJ, what they call me, and today we got more from one of the best stories Marvel has going right now in Chip Zdarsky's Avengers Twilight, with issue number 3 of this 6-part miniseries. And if you remember in the last issue, it ended with one of the biggest reveals we've seen in quite some time. And if you need to get caught up on it, I'll leave a card right up top as well as a link at the end of this video to the playlist. But this series has been so dope so far. And after Cap got word that Tony Stark is being held at the Raft, you already know what his next mission is. So if you guys are ready to see how this Stark rescue mission fares for Cap, then you guys know what time it is. Let's get it. So when this issue picks up, we see that Thunderbolts team from the last issue, and their sergeant is just tearing into these guys. And I say sergeant, but I'm not really sure of what his rank is, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to call him the sergeant. But he's ripping these guys a new one for not being able to stop old Steve Rogers. Then he zeroes in on Bullseye and gives her an even harder time because she had the shot and didn't take it. But she tells him that it was because he was unarmed. But the sergeant, he ain't trying to hear that, and he reminds her that Steve Rogers is a weapon. In fact, the most dangerous military asset ever created. He's dangerous. Then we transition to Steve, and he can't sleep right now, thinking about his old team and more specifically, Tony Stark. He doesn't like that Stark is imprisoned while the country still uses his genius. So Rogers makes up his mind to go and free his friend. But he doesn't want to include the other defenders in this fight because they're mostly children, and Steve doesn't want to see any of them lose their lives. But as he tries sneaking out, Tyler is still awake as well, so Cap pays him a visit to see if he's been able to complete the transmitter that Steve had requested. And Tyler lets him know that he was actually able to make one, and is currently sending out the signal that Steve wanted. Although Tyler isn't quite sure what that signal is because he can't seem to figure out the code or the language that it's using. But Steve lets him know that it's a very old distress signal and pretty much a Hail Mary at this point. Now I want you guys to remember this moment because that signal is going to pay off in a big way by the end of this. But Steve thanks Tyler for his work. Then he tries to bounce, but Tyler won't let Steve go to the raft all alone. Plus, Tyler can override all of their security, so he's kind of needed. Then we transition to Steve and Tyler heading towards the raft in an old Quinjet that had been stashed away in one of Tony's old properties. See, the government had confiscated everything from Avengers Mansion after H-Day, but Tony still has some good old stash spots. Meanwhile, Tyler is quite impressed with how sophisticated the tech is in this Quinjet, even though it's old at this point. But that's because Tony Stark was always a futurist, and he stayed ahead of his time. So when they arrive at the raft, once Tyler helps Steve get inside the security door, Steve then makes Tyler remain with the Quinjet because he knows it's about to get real dangerous beyond this point. But once Cap is inside, he dodges a few security cameras, and then he ends up stealing a jacket and a badge from one of the scientists he finds roaming the halls. But he's got to move quickly because he's sure they'll be on to him soon. And he uses this guy's card to access the room that Tony is being kept in. Then when Steve walks in, he's shocked to see Tony as a floating head, but he vows to get him out. If he could just figure out how all of this works. He now realizes that he could have used Tyler's help on this, but then he realizes that he's not alone, as someone speaks to him, noticing that he was having a hard time. Then we see that it's Bullseye, and she has her scope trained directly on Cap. But Cap recognizes her as the soldier who didn't shoot him last time, and he asks her for her name, which she tells him. Then she lets him know that she figured he'd make a play for his old buddy, and because he's a terrorist, she's gonna have to put him down. But Cap explains to her that that's not the case, and she's been fed some BS, but he understands that she's just a soldier following orders. But while Cap is talking with her, they're joined by James Stark, who had come to visit Tony and is surprised to see Steve there. So Steve lets him know that he's here to take Tony away because it isn't right that he's kept here like this. But James replies to Steve that what isn't right is Steve taking his geriatric steroids and beating up cops all because the world isn't what he remembers it to be. Then Steve goes into how wrong the government is for throwing people in prison just for questioning them. But James begins to rant that the country is fed, entertained, and happy. But to the ones that want to screw that up for everyone, to hell with them and throw them in the pit for all he cares. But meanwhile, Bullseye's still there hiding in the ceiling, and she's hearing everything. And when James threatens to call the Avengers for Steve, she shoots him in the shoulder with an arrow. Then she hops down and helps Cap unlock Tony so they can make a break for it. But now Cap is confused and wonders why Bullseye decided to help him. But he doesn't get an answer. And there's really no time for explanations anyway, as Cap pulls Tony out of there and lets Bullseye know about his aircraft he has waiting outside. But now they're in big trouble as James manages to get his Iron Man helmet on and signal for a security breach right before he's shot again in the other shoulder with an arrow by Bullseye. And now all the alarms are going off. So this stealth mission just became a loud one. But Bullseye knows the layout of this place. So when Cap tells her where his ship is, she leads the way. But she needs to make a detour first. And she tells Cap that she figures this escape would go a lot smoother if he were a bit more whole. And she leads him to where his shield is being held. And now it's on. Steve Rogers is now complete, and it immediately pays off as he's able to deflect some shots coming their way. Then he flings the shield at these guards, knocking them out. Then Steve radios ahead to Tyler to let him know that they're coming in hot. But just then, they're intercepted by James, who's now donned an Iron Man suit of his own. And James sends a blast Cap's way. But thankfully they stop for that shield because it's been super useful already. But then James is blasted in the back. And when he turns, we see that it's Tyler in the Quinjet. But he's immediately shot down by James. And now Tyler is falling fast. But Cap runs down the falling Quinjet and leaps onto the windshield and breaks the glass with his shield and rescues Tyler from up out of there. He's determined not to let anybody die on this mission. And his skills even leave James a little bit impressed. But as James seems to fly off, Bullseye thinks he's hightailing it out of there. But Cap realizes that is not what he's doing. And he yells for everybody to run because James flies straight up in the air and then straight down on the walkway like a rocket, completely crushing the ground beneath everybody and even sending his own Raft guards flying through the air and into the river. Then James walks down Steve, accusing him of being the past and fighting the future. But Steve corrects him because he's fighting for the future. And now the brawl is on, as Stark is just unloading haymakers at Cap. He realizes that he should have made himself an armor suit a long time ago because he's loving this newfound feeling of power. He finds being Iron Man an incredible high, and he manages to get the head of his father away from Steve, who now pleads to James that people are dying. But James could care less because dying is just what people do. Well, most of them anyway, as he looks at Tony's head in the jar. Then he tells Steve that all of the rules that Steve hates are geared towards saving people, and all it takes is a few hard measures, a few examples made, a few dreamers to put to sleep. Then Steve hits him with the, what gives you the right to make those decisions? Your money? Your father's brilliant mind? You're lost, son. Then James straight up tosses his dad's head into the river, saying that he doesn't need him anymore. He doesn't need anyone. Then his Cap rises back up and continues to fight. Bullseye and the rest of the guards, while still fighting to get out of the river, start to notice a huge rumble. Then we see a fully embiggened Miss Marvel who manages to scoop everyone out of the river, including Tony's head. It takes them to a nearby boat that more of the defenders seem to show up in. But James wants no survivors, and he aims his blast towards their direction and fires, only to be knocked back by Steve, who's finally fighting back. And now these guys are having one epic fight. And I think this is a fight that'd be dope to watch on the screen, because these guys are going at it. But then Cap manages to catch James with a shot to the face from his shield while telling him, "It's over, son." But this just pisses James off, who tells Cap to stop calling him son. "I'm not your child. I'm James Stark and I run the world." Then we see Miss Marvel climbing into the boat and it looks as if James's blast hit her in the back. Then James looks to Steve, who's now down, and it's looking bleak for Cap as James says to him, "Goodbye, Uncle Steve. Your dreams are a little too dangerous." And he aims his blaster and goes to fire. But just then, James is hit with a huge lightning blast from out of nowhere, putting James down. And when James asks Steve what did he do, Steve tells him, "What I always do in hard times. I prayed." And then we see Thor flying down telling Steve that it's been a wolf's age, Captain. Shall we assemble? That was the distress signal that Cap had Tyler send out earlier. It was to contact Thor, and the Hail Mary worked. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the issue. Man, y'all, this story so far is hitting on all cylinders. Chip Zdarsky is not missing yet with this one. This issue had plenty of action in it, and that fight between Steve and James was classic. And slowly but surely, Cap is putting the band back together. He's even got a new Hawkeye now with Bullseye. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe I called that one after the last issue. It kind of felt like once she saw Cap trying to save lives, then she realized he wasn't the enemy, and it seemed like she was going to flip sides. So I'm really digging this story, and I hope you are too. But I'd like to hear from you guys on what your thoughts are so far with where this story is at. Each one of these issues has been giving us some nice reveals by the end, and I thought this one with Thor was right on time. Did you guys expect that the signal being sent out was for him? And man, young James Stark is an entitled little ass, ain't he? I wondered after the last issue if he knew Jarvis was actually the Red Skull. And although we still haven't officially gotten an answer to that question, we do see that he has no regard for life as long as he can reach his goals. But I'm loving having Tony Stark's son as a villain. We all know Tony used to kind of straddle the line between good and evil, so it isn't far-fetched that his offspring would be this way, especially after being raised by Red Skull Jarvis. But again, I want to hear from you guys on your thoughts, and as always, if you guys enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel, then you could do so by joining the new Iconic Fan Club membership. With your membership, you'll gain access to weekly interactive live streams with yours truly in front of the camera, where we could talk about what's been going down in these issues, as well as other ones that you'd like for me to go over in the future, and other comic book news as well. Plus, you guys will get loyalty badges, member shout outs in these videos, and more. Or you can donate to the channel with a super thanks. And if you're not able to do any of these, then you can still be a huge help by dropping a like, share, and subscribing to Comics Icons for more icons in the comic book world. But ladies and gentlemen, it's about that time. I'm out. Peace.